Hallo, hallo. Ja. Hei alle sammen. Det noen her som ikke forstår norsk? Nei. uh, is, is there someone who would like to talk to me in English? I guess you would. Yeah. So the slides are in Norwegian, but I think I will speak in English because of the foreigners present. So this is. I think you've read my blog, you read my first book, you've seen my work where I go and I visit individual brewers and I try to understand why do they brew the way they do, what tastes do you get. But I've been doing another project at the same time, which is about something, well, it's not completely different, but it's quite different because I'm trying to look at what was brewing like in Norway. The complete picture, what is the entire variation, and also what is the history of it. So that's what this book is about. And I would like to start by thanking the sponsors. It's an academic book, so the publisher didn't expect to sell a lot of books. Therefore, they wanted sponsorship for the book to pay for itself. So Nordbrygg, Bryggeriforeningen, og Ås Bryggeri all helped fund this book. And there was a fourth sponsor who doesn't have a logo. This is Terje Aas. He's pitching the Kveik into Hardangerøl. So he also actually helped sponsor the book. But I guess you want to hear about the book, right? So for me, the beginning of the whole thing was when I got a bottle of beer from Stjørdal, from Morten Granås. And the thing about that beer was that just from the flavor, I could tell that this was not a normal beer. This was not a modern beer, which of course made me very curious. What was it? Where did it come from? And when I started digging into that, that's when I got invited to brew in Kaupanger with Carlo Aall. And of course, the moment I walked into the brew house, it was obvious that, oh, he isn't a modern brewer. He's not a modern home brewer at all. This is just something completely different. And this made me super excited. I really wanted to know now, what is this? Where does it come from? And the only place to get any answers, it seemed, was from this book that Professor of Ethnology, Odd Nordland, published in 1969. It's a super interesting book, deep ethnological research, but it's done by somebody who didn't know anything about beer. In fact, he was a teetotaler, han var avholdsmann. So he didn't even know how beer is supposed to taste. So yes, it's an important and interesting book, but as a brewer, it doesn't really give you the answers that you want. But it explained one thing to me, and that's, I've said this before, I'm sure many of you have heard it, that the starting point for all of this was the fact that pretty much everyone in Norway made their living by growing grain and then eating it, right? That's what kept people alive, literally. So if they grow barley, of course, they have everything they need to make beer, right? The only thing that's missing is you have to put in some work. The beer is free. But the thing that makes it not completely free is the grain that you eat, that you brew with, you can't eat. But other than that, you don't have to pay anything at all. And yeah, I've done this many times as well, but I think it's important to do it again. That farmhouse brewing basically starts when agriculture is invented, almost 10,000 years before Christ. And it's only, say, 800 years ago, the commercial brewing really becomes a thing. It develops into the porter breweries in London that are the first breweries to really scale up to massive size and that start introducing equipment like hydrometers, thermometers, and this kind of thing. But all of the modern commercial brewing, lager brewing, craft brewing, also modern home brewing, comes from this branch of the brewing world, right? They all think in the same way. They all brew the same types of beer. They all read the same textbooks. And then meanwhile, Jørund and Stig and Sigurd Johan have been doing their own thing, right, in the countryside. So this is why the beer tastes completely different. It comes from a completely separate branch of the brewing world. And once I realized this, you know, Michael Jackson famously divided beer into three. There was lager, that's a horrible word, we should never use it, top fermented beer, and spontaneously fermented beer, right? And once you've started to understand the previous slide, this is no longer the way to see beer. This is the way to see it. You have beer, and it's separated into farmhouse brewing and modern brewing. The differences here are much, much bigger than the differences between those three branches of commercial brewing. So, of course, when I started seeing beer in this way, what that meant was half the world of beer basically was almost undescribed. There was almost nothing, no information about it at all. Just like discovering half the world is just white on the map. So, of course, I wanted to know what's going on here. And I'd already read the only book about it, right? So where could I find more information? Of course, I went round, I interviewed people, I brewed with them, you know all that. But where to get information about the places where they don't brew anymore? Well, Odd Nordland says right in the foreword of his book. The book is based on a questionnaire from the Norwegian Folk Museum, worked out in 1952, sent out 1952, 1953. Why don't I go look for that? And if you put this into Google, quite soon you find Norsk Etnologisk Gransking, list of their questionnaires. Number 35 is beer brewing, and there's all the questions. And then if you send them an email and you say you're going to write a book and you would like to get this material, you have to sign a contract and pay some money, and they give you all the answers. Right? Hey ho. And these answers are not like other sources. Here is one, comes from Stardalen in Jølster, Sogn og Fjordane, was written down by this guy. Where did he get the information? He got it from a kårmann, an old man basically, 76 years old, that he's interviewed. You get right down to the actual brewers. These are people saying, this person in my home village told me this, or my mother brewed like this. It's really, it couldn't be better as sources. Absolutely fantastic material. But as you see, a lot of it is handwritten in dialect. Yeah. And there's 103 questions, 183 answers, 1,250 pages, I think. And there's no background. The questions aren't there. It's all answers. It's pure information for 1,200 pages. It's absolute goldmine. So of course, my thinking was when I got this, I will know everything. Everything will be clear. And then I start reading it, and they don't agree on anything, right? You read one answer, it says, the question is, who brewed the beer? Was it men or was it women? And the first one says, it was women's work. Okay, great. Now I know that. And you turn to the next one and it says, oh, there weren't any particular rules about that. It could be anyone. What? And then you turn to the third one and it says, no, it had to be men. Women weren't allowed in the brew house. It's like, make your minds up. Was it men or was it women? And then imagine 103 questions, 193 answers, and they all are like this. So in English, they have a very good expression for this. It's called mind-blowing. This was mind-blowing. There was not room in my head for all of this information. I couldn't analyze it. But I got to start when I was reading older literature that was describing what herbs were people using in their beer, except for hops, because we all know about hops. That's not interesting. And the entire literature was all about Porsche in Norwegian, America Gale in English, In fact, Nils von Hofsten wrote a thick, very scholarly book about beer herbs, and in the title he says Miracle Gale and other ingredients. But the questionnaire but then how do you do that? You can say, okay, Nils von Hofsten wrote this. All the questionnaire answers say something else. That's not the paper. You need a method, right? You have to do something more with the material. And so, well, I used to be an IT guy. So of course, I made the database. Put in where was the answer about, when was it written, who wrote it, and then put in every single herb that's mentioned in any of the answers. And what that showed me quite soon was that 183 answers is not enough to cover Norway. Norway's too big for that, basically. So there's a lot of areas that almost weren't described at all. So I had to turn to all of the interviews that I did, and I also had to turn to basically to published sources. In Norway, there was a huge movement to document what life was like before what we call the Store Hamskifte, the great agricultural revolution from the 1850s onwards, which really completely changed how life in the countryside was. It's the world before this revolution was a completely different place. uh, from their own village just by themselves. So there's a lot of data in that too. So with the database, I could make a map of where did people say there was brewing, and hey ho, it's everywhere. You can just go into the map here, and this is Ryfylkeheiene, nobody lives there. Hardangervidda, nobody lives there. This is Østerdalen. If you drive up Østerdalen, try and pay attention to how many grain fields there are. Kornåkre. There's almost none. And there aren't many people either. So people were brewing here, but there were very few people, and that's why there basically is no documentation of it. And of course, you can see that once you pass the Arctic Circle here, you get a lot more black, especially when you get into Finnmark, because it's too far north for grain growing. When they brewed, they used to buy the grain from further south. So that was the basics, but I could, of course, make a table. So here we get to the being able to do a scientific paper and get it accepted, right? So here's the table with countries this way and the different herbs that way. For Norway, 95% of the descriptions say they use juniper, 4% say they used Porsche, Miracle Gale. Hey ho, there's my conclusion, right? Bang. But the moment you collect the data like this and you start analyzing it, you go, why doesn't Denmark use juniper? What? And what's going on with wormwood, which is malurt in Norwegian and Denmark, or Porsche in Estonia? The Swedes are using bitter orange peel. This is classic research, right? You have a question, then you get answers, and the answers immediately give birth to 1,000 new questions, right? That's great. That's fine. I could, of course, also make a map to show where people use juniper. The gray dots is people who only use juniper in the filter, i Rosta. And the black dots are people who say they didn't use juniper at all. And what you see is, notice the Swedish border. Hey ho, not a lot of yellow. Yellow is juniper infusion. And also something strange with Upper Hallingdal. I don't know why. So this was a success, I felt. Okay, I managed to get some answers. So I decided I wanted to expand and just cover more. And over the course of roughly 10 years, I went nuts. And just, did they make the malts? What did they make it from? Which type of grain? Was it 2-row? Was it 6-row barley? How did they dry it? When they decided to dry the malts, how long should the green growth along the side of the grain be? What kind of wood did they burn? Did they remove the rootlets afterward? Blah, 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 blah. You can imagine, right? And then part of the point here was to get to which kinds of beer did they have where, right? And while I was doing this, we were getting to a point where people were thinking about farmhouse ale in the way that, okay, in Finland they have Sahti, in Estland they have Kodoulu, Lithuania has Kaimiškas, one type per country. And anyone who's been in this hall knows that this is too simplistic, right? There's more than one style in Norway. And these national borders don't necessarily work either. Stjørdalsøl is very similar to the Swedish Gotlandsdrikke, for example. So you can't use the national borders in this way. So how to do it then? I thought maybe I could start from Norwegian fylke, the counties or provinces. As you will see, that doesn't work at all. Those borders don't make any sense culturally. So I decided, let's go the other way. Let's collect the data, and the data will tell me what the regions are. That's why I have these maps with dots. And one of the things that I decided was one of the keys to the whole thing was, what are the brewing processes that people are using? And okay, I had made progress with the material. I'd found a method to make it systematic, but the trouble is, systematically registering brewing processes was really, really, really difficult. How do you describe what the brewing process is, right? So what I did was I decided, well, let's just number them one by one, right? So the first one is, you boil the mash, you run off, boil the wort with hops, then you run off again. Okay, that's brewing process number one. Number two is mash like they do in Hornindal, infusion mash, run off and boil humlebeit, boil the hops and just some of the wort. Okay, that's number two. That works, but I now have 280 brewing processes. You can imagine a map with dots in 280 colors, right? It's going to be completely useless. So, but it's still progress, right? Because instead of having all those descriptions to work with, I now have this list. I just have to classify the list, and we can get a result. So essentially, I have to decide what is important in the brewing process. What are the things that are actually significant? And when I started, I thought it was the boiling, right? Because it makes a big difference when you taste the beer. The boiled and the non-boiled beer obviously taste different. But the trouble is, as a cultural trait, it actually seems a little bit superficial. It's easy to find examples of brewers who start boiling after they didn't, or who even go the other way. They used to boil and then they stopped. So it's not ideal. And I realized, as you will see afterwards, that this is something new. We only have a few centuries of this stuff. But the stuff that's really old is mashing, mesking. If you don't mash, there will be no beer, right? So we have thousands of years of that. And I've never seen anyone change the way that they mash, like really switch from one method to the other. So I decided to focus on that. And then what's interesting is Michael Jackson did this breakdown ale lager, right? Well, lager, sorry, is decoction mashing, famously. Ale is some infusion mashing in the UK, step mashing in Belgium. If Michael Jackson had used this method, he would have divided up beer almost in the same way that he did. Of course, this would have been much more difficult to explain. You can't explain this to normal people, but it would have worked. So what I did was I put infusion mashing. That's when you put hot liquid on the malt, you wait, and then you run off. The standard method around here. On one side, and then on the other side, I put what I called complex mashing. So Jørund, doing this circulation and heating, people mashing in the kettle, boiling the mash, and a lot of other really weird things. They all go in that category. And then we have the oven stuff, the stone stuff, and the really, really weird stuff where you ferment in the mash, which nobody's done since Ivar Husdal did it. And then when you put that on the map, it's like, oh, look at this. Complex mashing in the east. Both of these are infusion mashing. Hey ho, we have progress. It works. And then when I look at, if you try another aspect of brewing culture, men and women, oh, there is a system. It's east-west. It's the same division again. Interesting. And then if you look at, for example, the words that people use, this is the word for the spent grain. Drav in the west, musk in the east. Hey, it works again. And the same result. And this hasn't been published, but when you look at the yeast, you get a similar result. So we have the kveik that's been collected in Western Norway. We also collected gong from Hallingdal and Bærum from Telemark. We don't know if this is one or two types, but what we do know is that this one is genetically different from kveik. So you get the same east-west separation in the genetics of the yeast as well, showing that, yes, we're really onto something here. So why is the separation east-west? Well, if you drove here from Oslo, you saw the answer along the way, right? The mountains. This is color-coded by height, and you see the huge mountain areas separating the east and the west. So of course, that's why you have the separation in brewing culture as well. There hasn't been enough travel and trade across the mountains to even out the cultural differences. And if you look at another aspect of Norwegian culture that's been studied very systematically, such as dialects, hey ho, same thing again. And you even see, we had the infusion mashing went up to here. Exactly the same as the dialect border. Historically, Vestlandet, Western Norway, was considered to include this part. So it even makes sense from the historical perspective. And you see the big dialect divide in Western Norway here. That's here, in between the people who boil and the people who don't boil. And why is the line there? Well, you see the white, right? Jostedalsbreen. That's the answer. That's the mountains separating one part of Western Norway from the other. It's as simple as that. One thing that's noticeable here is that there are some blue dots in the west, which in theory there shouldn't be, right? I can explain away some of them. So one of the dots up here is from it says right in the book that they describe how they brewed, and then it says, and the brewer that was famous in this village used to brew commercially for Hansa. Yeah, they were using decoction mashing. He learned it at Hansa. So that doesn't count, right? And there's also this one. It's from a guy who took up brewing after the method that's described in Olav Sopp's handbook in homebrewing. Okay, it doesn't count. But this one, I can't explain away. But there's one very interesting thing about that account, because the guy who wrote it says that he learned to brew from his mother. Well, this is Western Norway. This is a upper part of Lærdal Valley. He shouldn't learn from his mother. His mother shouldn't be brewing at all. So I wondered, is this an example of cultural influence creeping over the mountains? Because the main mountain crossing to Bergen is there even today. So I asked my uncle, who is from Lærdal, and he says, yeah, of course. His own grandmother is from Hallingdal, from the other side of the mountains. He also says here in Bolaug, upper part of the valley, the dialect is noticeably different from down in Lærdal, the town, because of this connection over the mountains. So yes, it really looks like this is Eastern brewing methods creeping over the mountains and starting to creep down Lærdal Valley. If we look at what Jørund did a couple of hours ago, putting cold water on the malts the day before you brew, that's the yellow dots. You see, it's typical of central and eastern Norway and Lærdal Valley. Really looks like Eastern brewing methods have been creeping over the mountains and beginning to spread into Western Norway. So when my successor stands here at Norsk Festival in 2073, he will probably have yellow dots extending much further into the west. That's my prediction. Or maybe not, who knows. I said the province borders were useless for analyzing the cultural structure. So Sogn og Fjordane is called that because it really consists of 3 traditional districts. The old traditional districts make a lot more geographic and cultural sense than administrative borders like the fylke. So Sogn is the region of Sogn and Sunnfjord and Nordfjord. That's the fjords, which is the second part of the word. And in terms of brewing culture, this is, in Norwegian, we say hummer og kanari, a mix of things that don't belong together. The dividing line runs through the word and, basically. And I guess most of you know the difference between the people who boil and the people who don't boil, but it goes a lot further than that, because the way they treated the hops, completely different. How much hops they used, also different. What they call the beer, different. How do you celebrate that the beer is done, different. Did they use alder in the filter? That's different. What did they call the small beer? That's different. So it's not just the boiling, it's a massive dividing line. So I guess we need a new fylkesreform. Yeah, I thought there would be a lot of enthusiasm for that. This is an internal Norwegian joke, sorry. If I had done this talk in 2021, I would have been speaking in Sogn og Fjordane, right? But I'm not speaking in Sogn og Fjordane because Hornindal County switched, and they are now part of Møre og Romsdal. And Møre og Romsdal follows the same logic as Sogn og Fjordane. It's also 3 traditional districts, but it has the wrong name. The name is completely pointless. The name should be Romsdal og Mørene. And the reason for that is we have Sunnmøre in the south, Romsdal in the middle, and Nordmøre in the north. That's clearly 2 Møre and 1 Romsdal, right? And in terms of beer culture, there's a similar distinction. So Sunnmøre is like Vestlandet, but these 2 are mixes of east and west. According to, they're dark if they're typical of Eastern Norway, and they're bright if they're typical of Western Norway. And you really see that, okay, this is all Western Norway, and it kind of stops here. After that, you get something that's darker. This is Sunnmøre, That's Romsdal. So it's weird. Why is part of the west coast not like the rest of the coast? It's more like the east. Well, if we turn back to this map, there's one place in Norway where you can go from the east to the west without having to go up in the mountains where there's no people living, there's no trees, etc., etc. That's if you go up Gudbrandsdal. That's the drive I did to get here. I took the left turn here at Otta. I have to go over the mountains, but if you don't do that, you follow the other branch, then the valley turns into Romsdal. You never have to go over 680 meters. There's people living the whole way. That's basically enough for beer culture to leak through the mountains and over to the west coast. Which leaves the question, why didn't it leak further south? Why did it stop in Romsdal? Well, my wife comes from Molde. I took this photo from her parents' living room. This is the border between Romsdal and Sunnmøre. Well, you see here why it didn't leak through, right? It's the mountains again. And then there's another thing about the brewing processes that I want to talk about a little bit, because for someone who's used to modern brewing, the first thing that strikes you about farmhouse brewing is the brewing processes are really, really weird, right? You have these people who don't boil the wort, that's weird. You have the people who boil the mash, that's super weird. You have the use of hot stones, that's crazy. And you have the Lithuanians and the other people who use the ovens, right? All of this is weird. The thing that's interesting is that all of these questions have the same answer. It's the same thing that's driving all of this weirdness, and it looks like this. It's the kettle. So this is a kettle from Denmark, from the Bronze Age. It's about 4,000 years old. One thing is that it's huge, but look at the decorations. This is not some poor farmer's ordinary kitchen implement. This was never used to brew beer. This was a status object. This was something that was worth like basically as much as a private plane today, right? Ordinary people didn't have this. And of course, that's the Bronze Age, right? It's 4,000 years ago. But how long did that last? Well, here is a famous document from Voss. Eirik Buch from the farm Finnen died in the Black Death. And there was a dispute over the inheritance. So this is the inheritance settlement, a legal document, where they go through all of the valuables that the heirs inherited, also det som ble arva, and it lists what everything is worth. Here it says, I guess you can read that it says, 3 heitukatlar, 4 atta kyrlog. That means 3 brewing kettles for 8 cows. So in other words, a brewing kettle is worth more than 2 cows, and an ordinary farmer 500 years later would be very lucky to have 2 cows. This was still, a brewing kettle was still worth a fortune. Ordinary people didn't have it. And this is why I said that boiling is a new thing, right? But it has more consequences, because if you don't have a kettle, how are you going to heat the mash, right? You don't have a container that you can put water or grain in over the fire. Well, the answer is super easy, right? You make a fire, put stones in it, drop the stones in a mix of cold water and malt, and hey, you raise the temperature, that's your mash, right? And those of you who were here when the Lithuanians were showing stone brewing, that's exactly what they did. The descriptions of stone brewing from Russia, from Austria, from Norway, from Sweden, from Denmark, from Finland, they all say the same thing. Stones go in the mash. And it's for this reason. So here we have the answer to why did people boil the mash. When you put stones in the mash, it makes the mash boil. So imagine somewhere in Telemark, 1620s, they've bought a kettle, brought it to the farm, and the wife is deciding, okay, we got this new technology, how am I going to use it for brewing? Well, if this is the way that you're used to brewing, obviously you just put all the malts and the grain in the kettle. You heat the kettle because you no longer need the stones. You can do it directly. And you used to boil the mash, so of course you keep doing it. Bingo. It's no harder than that. And we have been brewing beer almost certainly in Norway for 6,000 years. Kettles were really expensive in 1350. There should be a lot of brewing stone, right? And when the archaeologists dig, that's exactly what they find. It looks like this. Geir Grønnesby at the University in Trondheim says that they haven't excavated every farm in Norway, but they believe that on every farm in Norway, you find this heat-shattered stones mixed with ash in huge amounts. A typical amount is like 1,500 cubic meters. That's 200 garbage containers full of shattered rock. Sounds great, right? We've worked out everything, except it's not that simple. This is from the book. It's a timeline that starts. This is when grain growing starts in Norway. This is where we are. This line is the oldest description of brewing of any kind from Norway. It means before this arrow, we have no direct evidence for the brewing processes the people used. Everything back here has to be guessed from archaeology, right? Brewing stones stop here, so the archaeologists think this is the point where ordinary people could afford kettles. This is roughly 1600. But they start here. What the hell? That's 4,500 years where we don't know how people brewed. That's a little bit disconcerting, right? There's also something else here that's interesting. You see this line? It's the separation between the early Iron Age and the late Iron Age. You see, there's another kind of heat-shattered stone that they find that stops here and becomes replaced by this new type of heat-shattered stone. Also, Norwegians used to make ceramics, and they stop here. What's going on right at this specific boundary? And that's actually an interesting story. You've heard about Fimbulvinter, if you're Norwegian. That's the Old Norse myth about the time in the future when Fenrisulven, a mythical wolf, is going to swallow the sun, and there will be 3 years of continuous, very, very harsh winter. The people who study these myths have thought for a long time that this probably refers to something that actually happened historically. And what's interesting is that they've actually found what that probably is. Because in the years 536 to 540, there was a very strong cooling of the globe, basically the Earth. So temperature dropped by 2.5 degrees all across the world. And from the sources, we can tell that this was caused by something in the atmosphere blocking the light. It says here, the sun was dark and the darkness lasted for a year and a half. Every day the sun shone for around 4 hours, but the light was just like a pale shadow. Fruits didn't ripen and the wine tasted like sour grapes. This is from Syria, from the Middle East. So the consequence here in Norway was that the grain didn't ripen, and that was the thing that people lived from. So the estimate from archaeologists who see how many farms are abandoned is that half the people in Norway died. So you can just imagine, right, what that does to society. Much worse than the Black Death. And the culprit looks like this. It's the volcano Ilopango in El Salvador that had a massive eruption. So basically, dust and ash from this eruption blocked sunlight for many years. And this mountain looks pretty innocent, right? So how could this That's why this line is there, basically. As I said, this is another type of heat-shattered stone that the archaeologists find. The archaeologists think these stones are from people cooking meat. You take meat and you wrap it in leaves, bury it this deep in the soil, and you put hot stones with it, and that cooks the meat if you wait 2 or 3 hours. Supposedly really nicely tasting. I think, well, in these pits, you don't typically find bones. That's a little strange if they were used to make meat, right? Or cook meat. So I think these are water. The skin doesn't burn. And the reason this works is that the water absorbs the heat. Water doesn't go above 100 degrees, right? So it cools the skin and it never catches fire. You can even use wooden bark. I know this sounds completely crazy, but you can go home and try it and it will work. You can even do it with a plastic bottle. It won't melt. You can boil the water inside, but it's not going to melt if it can handle 100 degrees. Maybe they use ceramics. Other places in the world, people may difference because there's a strange thing where we have far more documentation of farmhouse brewing from the West than we do from the East, but all of the descriptions of stone brewing come from the East. There's, yeah, let's say there's 3 in the East and there's 0 in the West. Why is that? Well, what if people use the stones in different ways? Let's say that in the East, they brewed stone beer the way that I described to you, and in the West, they dumped the stones in water, maybe with juniper branches, heated the water, and then poured that on the malts. If that's the same. So maybe people in the East stuck to the stones because it gave them a different flavor, whereas the people in the West didn't stick to it because it didn't make any difference. It's a guess, but it's the trouble with this is it's a theory that fits everything we know, but there's no direct evidence for it. So it's not clear whether it's true. What was it I wanted to do here? Oh, yeah. This region, where we are now, the raw ale region, is interesting because it stands out in basically all of the maps. Like, however you decide to try and classify Norwegian brewing regions, this always winds up being one region that's different from the others, no matter what you look at. And one example of that is how did people add hops to the beer while they were brewing? Heimabrygg-området, the southwestern region, you just boil the hops with the wort, right? Nothing interesting. In the east, hop tea. And you can see most of the It's one thing that's interesting is that there's a similar distinction in cheese making. Traditional cheese making here, Hardanger, Voss, Sogn, you boil the milk. Sunnfjord, Nordfjord, Sunnmøre, you don't. It's exactly the same as with the beer. So nobody that I know of has ever looked into the history of the use of kettles in Norway. But I think if you did, you would find interesting stuff. And it turns out there is actually a kind of source that you can use to learn about this, which is arveoppgjør, inheritance protocols. So from 1650, every single inheritance settlement was recorded by the local priest. And for all of them, they go through all the valuables, and the kettles, if they have them, are always listed with their value. So you can go through the stuff and just find out for every single farm, when did they get the kettle? The trouble is, of course, this is, who knows, 50,000 pages, 100,000 pages. It's written in Gothic handwriting, which is not like modern handwriting. You need training to read it. And the priests didn't have enough paper, so they're trying to squeeze everything into as little space as possible. So, but if any of you have a history student, maybe in the basement or in a cupboard, I would like to borrow this history student. This is serious work for some sort of thesis, I think. Yeah, work to do, hasn't been done. Okay, so I've gone through a little bit of the stuff about brewing processes. There's actually much more than what you heard. We go through all the different ways of treating the yeast, everything we know about different types of yeast, the history of yeast in Norway, blah, 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 all of that stuff. Yeah, but that's in the book. I can't stand here all night. Any questions? Huh? Yeah, of course. Yeah. You have to buy it first, but then I will sign it. Yeah. Yeah. Hvorfor snakker man hele tiden om hva fra øst til vest? Ja, det er et kjempebra spørsmål. Det vet jeg ikke. Men altså spørsmålet, hvorfor snakker jeg om at det lekker fra øst til vest i stedet for andre veien, er jo kjempebra. For meg så ser det ut som en god del av sider av bryggingen er eldre i vest enn de er i øst. Det virker som øst er mer modernisert, hvis du skjønner hva jeg mener, og da er det naturlig å tenke at bevegelsen går den veien. Ja, det var det. Ja, men da slapp de jo ikke inn i brygghuset. Så jeg vet ikke. Det er et kjempebra spørsmål. Ja. Ja. Nå snakker du om menneskelig genetikk, ikke sant? Ja. Ja, det er også et kjempebra spørsmål. Ja, så det han sier er at når man studerer menneskelig genetikk, så snakker man om Nordsjøområdet, at Vest-Norge ligner de andre landene langs Nordsjøen. Og så er spørsmålet, ligner da Vest-Norge på andre land rundt Nordsjøen? For Storbritannia så har vi dessverre veldig lite informasjon. Men det som er om bryggeprosesser for eksempel, ser vel så mye ut som Øst-Norge egentlig. Og når det gjelder Danmark så er vel situasjonen mye den samme. Bare at det er en del ting langs Sørlandskysten som ser ut som de kommer fra Danmark. Der ser det ut som du kan se en sammenheng. Men det er et arbeid som gjenstår å gjøre skikkelig, egentlig det der å analysere flere land og begynne å se på sammenhengene. For det var ganske mye jobb det her, for å si det sånn. Ja. Ja, det er også et kjempebra spørsmål. Ja, ingrediensene faller jo egentlig da i 3 kategorier. Du har malte, så har du jern, og så har du det som er av urter. Og det som viser seg veldig tydelig da, er at forskjeller i hva som vokser hvor har styrt bruken av urter i veldig stor grad. Det vokser ikke så mye einer i Danmark. Og Storbritannia for eksempel, hvorfor brukte ikke de einer? Det er så lite einer i Storbritannia at det er regnet som en trua art, den er rødlista. En helt absurd tanke fra en nordmann, men sånn er det i Storbritannia. Og så vet jeg at du tenker nå på kornet, ikke sant? Ja. Og det som du ser når du ser på hvor folk dyrker hvilke kornsorter, er at de har gått knallhardt etter økonomisk vinning. Du planter det som gir mest avkastning, ikke sant? Og dermed så betyr det at du ser ikke i valget av kornsorter, så tror ikke jeg at du klarer å se noe kulturelt. Du ser egentlig klima og jordsmonn. Ja, det kan hende. Det er en jobb jeg ikke har gjort, rett og slett. Det er noe som bør gjøres, men det er ikke gjort. Ja, og gjær, der har vi for lite data, fordi at mesteparten av gjæren er borte. Andre spørsmål? Ja. Ja.
Stemmer ikke det at det er veldig lite kokestein i de områdene mellom Sogn så gjenger et skille i hva bergarten er. Ikke sånn at det er veldig lite kokestein mellom Ytre Sogn og Indre Sogn, og det er helt opp til Trøndelag at det er veldig lite kokestein.
Ok, så spørsmålet er om det finnes et belte fra Indre Sogn opp til nord til Trøndelag, ja, der det er veldig lite kokestein på grunn av bergartene. Det som jeg blir fortalt når jeg spør arkeologen om det her, er at det finnes ikke noen systematiske oversikter over hvor de har funnet bryggestein. Og det er heller ikke, det er veldig mange steder hvor det ikke er gjort utgravinger. Det er stort sett gravd ut i Midt-Norge, mens for Vestlandet er det nesten ikke gravd ut i det hele tatt. Sånn at ingen vet, så vidt jeg er klar over. Nei, men korn i bakken blir ikke bevart arkeologisk, det råtner. Så de eneste tilfellene hvor du finner korn er hvor det er brent. Så dermed det du kunne ha gjort var å se etter for eksempel fosfor eller andre stoffer som er i korn, som du da ville vente å kunne finne igjen. Men den jobben er ikke gjort. Hvis dere ikke har flere spørsmål, så kan dere få lov å... Det var et spørsmål.
Angående arveoppgjær og gotiske skrifter, så vi snakket om at det var veldig tidkrevende å oversette til moderne språk.
Ja, det er vanskelig å lese det, rett og slett. Jo, det er digitalisert for en veldig stor del. Det har du helt rett i. Det er et prosjekt det er et prosjekt akkurat nå som jobber med å kunne gjøre automatisk gjenkjenning av gotisk håndskrift for å få det transkribert. Og det vil jo revolusjonere hele den problemstillingen her. Absolutt. Ja, jeg vet ikke hva de bygger på da, men de jobber med det, det gjør de. Ja, det glemte jeg nesten å si. Jeg har med bøker hvis noen vil kjøpe. Hvis dere ikke har lyst til det, så kan dere gå og kjøpe øl. Takk.